Hi, I'm Jamila Lepere. I'm an independent journalist from the Netherlands. I am doing a call out to people who have followed the Corona Ausschuss Committee, the Corona Investigative Committee, or ICIC Law, co-founded and founded by Reiner Fuellmich, the German lawyer. He's in prison in Göttingen, Germany at the moment. He's been there for 10 months and he's in isolation. Here is the address of the prison. He loves getting mail. He tries to write back. And if you would write to him, it would really make his day. Thank you very much.
It's August 24th, 2024. Welcome to Potkaars. I am Rico Brouwer. I'll be talking to Jamila Lepere, a colleague journalist of mine who is in Germany currently, who has visited Reiner Fuellmich, and just yesterday another leg in his lawsuit in Germany. So Potkaars, conversations with candle, in Dutch anyway. So I light one at the start of a show, talk to people who give me hope, and I will be switching to Jamila in a moment, but we'll be talking about Reiner Fuellmich. He is a German-American lawyer who in the corona crisis took it upon himself to take the PCR test and the fraudulent government behavior to court in maybe the biggest class action lawsuit the world has ever seen. And he started interviewing people for that, and it got traction, and it also got donations. Now there was a dispute about how they used that money, which led up to him being, I don't know the proper English word, I think apprehended, taken into custody in a foreign embassy. He was put into a Lufthansa plane, flown to Germany, where he was arrested, and he is in jail since. Now Jamila Lepere has visited some of his recent lawsuits in that procedure, but also visited Fuellmich himself just a couple of days ago. So welcome to the show. Jamila, how was my introduction?
That was very good.
Okay, so we're going to do two things in this talk. Your update on the lawsuit just yesterday, which is like every week kind of, and you've been going to the last couple of ones. But also you visited Fuellmich in German prison just Wednesday, so your update on that. Before we do that, here's two Dutch people talking English, so apologies to the Dutch audience who are used to us talking Dutch. I just yesterday talked to Avoye Moric of the Geopolitics and Empire podcast, which I highly recommend. But we interviewed, and I also gave a small update on the case of Fuellmich as I understand it. And we decided, Jamila, to do this one in English, so the audience that Avoye has with his Geopolitics and Empire podcast can also get and understand the update that we're giving on Fuellmich. Where to start? What was yeah?
Well, there's a lot now at the end of the week. First of all, I think last week or so, somebody made a statement about the Mexican abduction. You know, Fuellmich was in Mexico and he was sort of abducted from there. I think the German authorities must have learned from Assange's case and thought, we're not going to wait this whole extradition procedure palaver, because that will, might not happen, and we'll just kidnap him. And so I don't know who made it, but somebody put on paper what actually is the situation with Mexico. And the thing is, Reiner Fuellmich was brought to Mexico City. So when he landed in Tijuana to get his passport renewed, he thought he was lured to the consulate. He was, he was taken by Mexicans to Mexico City, and there he had to sign a lot of documents, but they were all in Spanish. And according to law, you have to have an interpreter present who will translate it in your own language so that you know what is being held against you and so on. And supposedly he was being, how do you call it, uitgewezen.
Extradited?
So you're thrown out of the country, basically,
okay,
because of some things you've done wrong. His wife, however, wasn't, and her situation was exactly the same. She also went for a new passport. The thing is that he never knew exactly why he was thrown out of the country. He was transported to Germany on and the Germans paid for it. So it wasn't actually a Mexican thing. Otherwise, the Mexicans would have arranged it, but it was actually Germans. But also now it transpires that in the dossier of Reiner Fuellmich in this court hearing, there is no translation of the Mexican papers. So neither the court nor the state prosecutor officially know what is in those papers. So they cannot even test whether that was correct or not. And we know, of course, that the state prosecutor doesn't want to check it because he is the one who conspired with the German intelligence agency in Mexico to lure Reiner Fuellmich into the consulate to get his passport renewed, but that's another story. But so that's already odd, to say the least. There should be the documents in there translated by a certified translator. So that was one thing that came out. Then they explained what the reasons are, what the grounds are to be expelled. That's the word. Expelled from a country are, and that is either you had false papers, you committed a crime, you didn't follow orders by the immigration services, you returned to the country after being expelled. Well, none of these things apply to Reiner Fuellmich. So the grounds of his expulsion should be tested in court, but they aren't. So that was one thing. Another thing was a sort of bombshell letter that came out this week by a lady called Andrea Christidis. And she is well known in Germany because she's one of those really post type of people who fight, who were in the youth care industry or organizations and found out that lots of things were not right and children were trafficked. So she has been persecuted herself for 10 years, of course, has learned a lot about law and about how things work. And hang
on. You mentioned Roelie Post. Many people may not know that name. So she used to work for European Commission. She is a European Union employee, and she was assigned a job to help Romania join the EU. And her job was to make sure that they dealt with children properly. And she found out that children were being trafficked, and she became a whistleblower there. And you mentioned her name in a positive way, say, well, that's one lady that doesn't let go. And I met her and interviewed her, and she's a very strong lady. And I must make sure this interview with you referencing her as in this manner will reach her, because I can imagine that would do her good. So, okay, well, a strong woman. Carry on.
This Andrea Christidis, she's recently founded a new organization called Action Resist. And she's gathering lawyers, all sorts of professionals, doctors, whoever, who want to stand behind others. So the lawyers in this Action Resist, they defend people like Reiner Fuellmich or others who are attacked for their human rights causes or whatever. Or there are people in there that have been attacked and tell their story, how it worked, so that we learn from them, and journalists are also involved. So this lady now is getting involved with the Reiner Fuellmich case, and so she wrote this letter, and she accuses, there are three people who started the prosecution of Reiner Fuellmich. And those are three lawyers. Two of them used to be in the Corona Ausschuss, and one was connected to Reiner Fuellmich to do with the law action suit. What is it?
Class action lawsuit, yeah.
The languages are swirling in my head. A class action suit. So the last one is Marcel Templin. He actually has nothing to do with the Corona Ausschuss, but he's also one of the three who started this complaint, who delivered all the information to the state prosecutor and did this. And in her letter, she accuses both Marcel Templin and Justus Hopman, so one of the two other lawyers, of being fraudulent. Apparently, Marcel Templin has, under oath, said something in Berlin in court that wasn't true. He is, well, that news will probably come next week, so I can't really say it yet, but there's a cloud of gray area around him, and she knows more. She hasn't put it in her letter. She just accuses them of being fraudulent, and that the court is basing their judgment or their trust in these people that are fraudulent, that are saying, also their statements, their witness statements in these court proceedings have not been true. Even Viviane Fischer, who also accused Reiner Fuellmich, but wasn't part of this particular prosecution, she has also said in her statement that what the others said at some points wasn't true. So it's quite a fiery letter. She must be sure of her case, otherwise she wouldn't say what she's saying. And immediately Justice Hoffman reacted and threatened to sue her or to put charges against her. So that has all happened before I went to visit Reiner Fuellmich. But I want to start with the case yesterday. Yesterday was the 26th hearing, and it was supposed to be half a day. And in Germany, Fridays are half a day. They go until 12. And after that, everything is closed in court. Well, not so yesterday. First of all, there's so many angles or threads of this case. It's very hard to.
Well, when you lose me, I'll interrupt and just bring it back to the.
All right.
But there's two main things I want to get out of this conversation: the highlights of yesterday's court case, and how's Reiner doing, because you met him last Wednesday. So when we cover those two grounds, that's a good conversation. So carry on.
Yeah. So yesterday we knew that Professor Martin Schwab, who was also connected to the Corona Ausschuss, he wasn't actually one of the managers or when you say pullers, but he was often in their broadcasts as an advisor, as a commentator for the legal aspects. And he is a friend of Reiner Fuellmich, but he's also very connected to the three people that have charged Reiner Fuellmich, because they have all been his students, and Justus Hoffmann is still his assistant. So, it was a very difficult situation for him yesterday. He was literally sitting between the two parties, straight across from the judge. And so he had to answer one question first, and that was about, was the money that Reiner Fuellmich and Viviane, but it wasn't about Viviane. Viviane also borrowed 100,000 from the Corona Ausschuss, but Reiner borrowed 200,000 and 500,000. So for easiness, they speak of 700,000. And now I lost my thread.
You were describing. Here's my camera. You were describing the situation in court where Fuellmich was with the other parties. And
oh yes, the question that they were supposed to ask. So they weren't to divert, go beyond that question, is whether this loan was a liquidity loan, that the money had to be liquid and available all the time, or that it was a safekeeping, so that people couldn't touch it. And at first we thought, oh my dear, what is he saying now? Because he confirmed that it was a liquidity loan. But then Miseré, the lawyer for criminal proceedings, he asked then Schwab, but what do you mean by liquidity? And then Schwab explained that with liquidity, he meant that the money was invested in a house, in real estate, to keep it away from the government, who was then going to take it.
But that's not liquidity.
This whole division between what the Germans call Wertspeicher, so to put something safe, you can't touch it, but nobody can touch it for a while, or to have it at your disposal all the time, is not an issue. It's the same thing. They're actually talking about the same thing, but they're trying to make it, Viviane Fischer tried to make it as if the money had to be available all the time, which was never the intention. They wanted to hide it from the government, so that because there were stories of other organizations that their accounts had been frozen or blocked or dissolved. And it had happened to Reiner with two of his accounts and the account of their bookkeeper. So already 3 accounts had been blocked. So it wasn't like a vague action of theirs. It was, necessary. And there was a lot of money coming in from the donations. So he confirmed that he knew, he didn't know about it all along. But when this whole item came up as a conflict between Viviane Fischer and Reiner Fuellmich at first, and he got involved as a mediator, then he learned that the money was there in the house, and people knew it was in the house, it was there to keep safe, and the money would come back after the sale. He didn't say all those things explicitly, but he just, because they were only allowed to discuss the liquidity and the investment in the house, so to say. So, but he confirmed that it was actually the same thing, that he talked about liquidity, but what he meant was this investment, this putting the money in the house. Then Katja Burmer, the main lawyer for Reiner Fuellmich.
Hang on. What I wanted to, I mean, between a rock and a hard place, so I don't want to interrupt you, but the Dutch-speaking audience that have seen our previous conversation will know what you're talking about. But there was lots of donations coming into the Corona Ausschuss, and they were afraid this was going to be stolen or made unavailable to them by authorities. So what they did in discussing it amongst themselves is loan it out to Viviane, loan it out to Fuellmich, and also invest it in gold so that it couldn't be touched. And you're talking about the house that was money that was put into Fuellmich's house with the intention of selling the house later, but just renovating that thing and keeping it safe in that way. Now, that was agreed upon by them, the way I understand it from you last time. However, there was a dispute. The judge last week said, well, the contract that you drew up wasn't all that valid.
Yeah,
okay.
And that came up again yesterday, because then this was the only question at first that they were allowed to ask, and then Katja Burmer submitted requests again to question the witness further, and then 2 more questions came up, and one of them was this sort of schijnverträge, so they're like deception contracts, and I thought initially that they meant they were just fake contracts, that the judge dismissed them because something formal wasn't right or whatever. But Schijnverträge is a term in Germany when you, somebody explained it to me. If I sell my house to you and it's worth 2 million, but I sell it to you for 1 million, and then we sort of do the other million, that's a Schijnverträge. So you sort of fraudulently avoid paying taxes or whatever. And so the judge implied that these contracts weren't done to safeguard the money, but that it was to enrich themselves. Well, that has been confirmed now by Schwab that wasn't the case, that it was very much to keep the money safe. So he confirmed that as well. And then what was the other question? Oh, the other question was whether it was likely that Reiner Fuellmich would pay back the money. And then he said that he didn't know. He didn't have any information that he wouldn't or would, it wasn't discussed according to him. He seemed to be very uncomfortable because Antonia Fischer, one of the people who are accusing Reiner, is sitting there, and he, is also his student. And so she asked him at a certain point, did you have the feeling he would pay it back? And he said, well, I knew that Reiner would take the money, he would use it for the broadcast. That was always his intention, to use it for broadcast. But he had started something new in the States, ICIC law. And that seemed at first harmful, as information for Reiner Fuellmich. But when Schwab learned about this was after Viviane Fischer. This was after this 2nd of September 2022, when Viviane Fischer had publicly implied that there was something the matter with Reiner Fuellmich and his handling of the loan. And so, because the mediation hadn't worked, they couldn't come together for some reason, the whole thing escalated. Then Reiner Fuellmich, later in 2023, said, I want now to use the money for my new thing, which of course is understandable. If you're thrown out of your own Corona Ausschuss And the money is in Corona. I think they gained about 4 million, in donations. So the money is still, the gold and everything is in Corona Ausschuss, and you have this loan of 700,000. Then it is, as a human being, understandable that you then say, well, if cutting me off of everything, then I'll use this money to start my own, to put in my own thing.
Yeah, but the core of the question in court is, was it fraudulent or not? And that's the dispute. I recall previous reports from you driving all the way into far side of Germany. So it's a long drive for someone who was living here in the Netherlands, where you said, well, nothing happened. There was a pause, and then we came back, and then we didn't learn what was happening, and then they stopped the proceedings again. Yesterday, many things happened. So what?
Yeah. Well, so this witness was an important witness because it sort of put straight what Reiner said all along about the loans, and who was also there was the new lawyer, Frank Rosenbach, who represents Viviane Fischer. Now, Viviane Fischer is the one that Reiner Fuellmich worked with in the second version of the Corona Ausschuss, because the Corona Ausschuss was first Corona Ausschuss, then it was never registered. That's the problem with this thing. These two lawyers that accused Reiner Fuellmich officially, they were connected to the Stiftung Corona Ausschuss, but it was never registered officially as a Stiftung, and now it's too late. Reiner and Viviane didn't want to work with those two anymore because they were never there. They didn't do anything in the background in terms of organizational stuff. And so they split and they started their Corona Investigative Committee. That was, I think, also never registered, but at least Viviane Fischer and Reiner worked together in that one. And then Reiner, when the clash happened between him and Viviane Fischer, he started his American ICIC law in America. So there are three versions, so to say. So Viviane Fischer, she was the one who started this whole thing with her public announcement on the 2nd of September 2022 to say that something was the matter. She had also then called the other two lawyers to inform them about what was happening. They then started doing the charge. But it is very coincidental that on the day that Viviane Fischer published in a black outfit that Reiner Fuellmich was not going to be in the broadcast anymore, and that there had to be things cleared, and actions speak louder than words, sort of things that she said. At that very same day, the other two submitted a file at the state prosecutor's office to prosecute Reiner Fuellmich. So it reminds me a little bit of when in Holland we have this freedom fighter Willem Engel, and he had a date, I think it was the 23rd of March in 2023 or so, when also all sorts of things happened on the same day. It just reminded me of that. Anyway, her lawyer is now trying
again. Now I'm the judge. I have to. So what Engel made the point in his lawsuit, where he was prosecuted, that various state organizations must have colluded together as everything was taking place at the same time. This organization did this, that thing did that, exactly on the same date, which is that there cannot be a coincidence there. And that was a date where he was incapacitated because he was in prison. So that collusion, you say there must have been organized also, that kind of collusion also organized in the Fuellmich case. That's what you're saying. Well,
in Willem Engel's case, there were more things, so it was more strange. Mm-hmm. It was weirder. This is only two events, but it just is, peculiar that they happened on the same day.
Okay, carry on.
And also, when Viviane Fischer announced that there was something dodgy going on, she had told Reiner Fuellmich there was not going to be a broadcast that day, and so he said, "Okay, we'll do it next week," because somebody in their team his wife was about to give birth. So he said, okay, fine, we'll do it next week. And then this broadcast happened, and he was told by the broadcast that he was no longer part of it. And he was thrown out. All the access to Corona Ausschuss had been blocked for him. So it was a very, not the nicest of ways to be leaving a company. Anyway, this lawyer, Viviane Fischer, is now in a sort of strange position. I think I still ought to interview her, but she did accuse Reiner. She had a different perspective recently, saying that actually, because the first Corona Ausschuss wasn't registered, there isn't actually a company. The company never had its own bank account. And so the money that they loaned from the bank account wasn't from a Corona Ausschuss, because there was no Corona Ausschuss bank account. It was a loan actually from the people who donated the money. So now this lawyer that she's using, he came up with the idea that they will represent the sponsors, the donators, so that they want to attach themselves to the plaintiffs, but they want the money back for the donators, the sponsors. So he was told to leave last time, or a couple of times ago, because his case was dismissed. But this time his thing was submitted. He was allowed to stay there in his toga in the room, and we'll hear probably next week whether they accept his proposal. He's collected some names from people who donated money, and so they are a party now in this thing. So that was that. Then there was another lawyer who came to the aid of Reiner Fuellmich's team, and he is also one of the lawyers from this Action Resist, but he is specialized in company law. So now they have criminal law expert, a company law expert, and so, but it was a very comical situation, because there were, on the Reiner's side, there were 4 lawyers. One is a lawyer that was given to Reiner by the court, because one time both his lawyers didn't show up, and then the court thought that was not going to happen to us again. We'll appoint a lawyer so that we know for sure. Then, ironically enough, the next hearing, this lawyer that they appointed was not there for half the day. But it's just a crazy situation. But so there were 4 lawyers for Reiner Fuellmich, and Reiner Fuellmich, who himself is a lawyer. Then you have the judges. Then you have the state prosecutors, which are 2 young men in suits who never say a word, or hardly say a word. They, of course, are lawyers, or at least legal experts or professionals. Then you have Antonia Fischer, who's a lawyer. And then you have this Grossenbach, who's a lawyer. So, and then you had the witness, Professor Martin Schwab, who is a professor in law. So the whole room was full of lawyers and legal experts, the accused, the witnesses, everything. It was sort of absurd. Is this what it's coming to? When democracy doesn't work, when justice doesn't work, do we end up with rooms of lawyers accusing each other and testifying for each other? I don't know. Maybe it's just my. I just thought it was funny.
After last update, I thought this thing was going to come to a conclusion yesterday, that we're going to wrap it up. The way you're describing it now, it's total chaos. I don't have.
Well, it's not chaos. No? It's developing. Every time there are developments, and this was the 26th hearing. Next week there'll be 2 hearings, the 27th and 28th, one on Wednesday and one on Friday again. Katja Wermer said at the end that she would try to invite another witness. So, then we know for sure that Wednesday again will not be the final hearing, because after all the evidence and the witnesses, then both parties still need to make their plea, their official, plea that they do. So they think that that's going to take at least an afternoon or so. So yeah, it could be that it ends next week, but it could be, the hearings are planned until October, and not because all those dates will happen, but just out of planning the agenda. Anyway, so that lawyer was there. Then Reiner Fuellmich also submitted again some things that he wanted to add to the dossier as evidence or what, but then the judge couldn't read it because at the moment he doesn't have a typewriter, so he had to handwrite it. Then there was another break because then Reiner Fuellmich could dictate whatever he'd written to Katja, who then put it on her computer and who sent it to the judge. And you must understand that it opens with, they need to talk to Reiner, they need to prepare him about what they want to ask the witness. So they go downstairs in the cellar where Reiner has a cell and he sits there handcuffed or not, I don't know. He comes in handcuffed every time. So they spend an hour and a half, it opens at 9:15, and then an hour and a half later we come back again because they had needed all that time to talk to Reiner Fuellmich. Then there's a break because then the judges need to discuss something. And this is all to do with the order of the main judge, that none of the information that they are putting back and forward, everything that is handed over is only written. They cannot read it out or comment on it orally. And
no, they could, but that was not allowed. That's what you're saying.
It's not allowed, no. And he refers to a certain precedent that happened in a particular case. But in that particular case, this was done not for all the material, first of all. And it was done because there were huge files of hundreds of pages that, it wouldn't be doable to read all that. So those things were under Selbstleseverfahren, as it is called in German, that you just read this material. But the judge now has decided that almost everything in this case is Selbstleseverfahren. So all the audience sees is this handing over of papers, the judges disappearing. If they disappear quickly, or we're allowed to stay, and if they say we need half an hour or so or more, then we can go. Yeah. But there's also every time the check. It's not like in Holland where you have a big courthouse and you can just then go out of the room and get a cup of coffee. Or no, it's just a small section of the court building. There's no coffee machine, there's no water, nothing. There's just a toilet. And so if you want to go out to the canteen, you have to go outside again through the checks. Then you get it checked again in the main entrance. Then you can go up to the canteen. And if you come back, you need to be checked again to get into court. So that takes a lot of time. So yesterday, we spent until 2:45 just in that little part, because every time it wasn't long enough to go through all these checks because of the audience. The checking in takes a lot of time. So yeah, I mean, it's quite a spectacle every time. It's a lot of things happen.
Maybe
I think that was that.
Yeah, at this point, I mean, maybe I can imagine people waiting for that. Before all this took place, you asked the court system and then the prison system to be able to visit Fuellmich, and you were allowed. So how would you? We need to go there. How is he doing?
Yeah, no, well, it's a bit different because I wanted, of course, to visit him, or lots of people want to visit him. But the problem is he only has 3 hours a month that he's allowed visitors. And one of those hours is basically spent on Skypes. They count it as visits as well. So his wife is still in Mexico, so he Skypes with her. And then there are some other people that sometimes he Skypes with. So though 1 hour is sort of designated for Skype visits. So he has only 2 hours left. And, I don't know Reiner, and so many of the other journalists don't really know. And as a press person, you definitely won't get in. They are very, they don't want you to do an interview or something. Maybe if you persist, maybe, but Roger Bittel from Bitteltaal TV has tried, and he has visited as a visitor, and just like I do. So I was reluctant to visit him because, who am I to visit him? But then I was talking to a friend of his, of Reiner Fuellmich, last week after the hearing, and saying, how is it? How is it with these visits? And she said, but why don't you come along next week? Because I'm going with the sister of Fuellmich. And then there's one place you can always go with 3. There's one place left. So why don't you come along? And I thought, well, then I don't take up, an extra hour of him. So I'm just tagging along. And then again, it depends on what the court says, because you have to apply to the court that the main judge in this court proceedings has to sign the paper, whether he allows you to go there. And then you have to call the prison, and then I had to read out the what's on my paper to see if they would have me that afternoon. It was all very last minute because I only applied on Monday, and because it was a short time between. And then they said, well, we have to send the permit by post. And I said, well, if I drive to Germany, I can pick it up tomorrow. And they said, okay, that's fine. So I went to Germany, picked it up. But then I still wasn't sure that the prison would allow me in because they said it depends what's on your paper. So I read my paper and they said, okay, you can come at 1. So about at 11 o'clock, I knew I could visit at 1. And I only had half an hour but I had half an hour with him because the sister and the friend of Reiner Fuellmich had to discuss important things with him. But yeah, so I mean, in terms of journalistic news, it wasn't, there isn't a lot to say because if you don't know somebody, the time is spent on telling who I am and why I'm here and the questions I have. And then because he's in isolation, of course, he's saying a lot of things, and some of the things I already knew, but he just explained his situation. I asked about Mexico, so he explained again how that went. And I asked him also whether he thought his last broadcast, because his last broadcasts were with Kathy O'Brien, who is an MK Ultra victim, and about mind control. And the combination is, of course, very, fireworky, so to say, because that's what's been rolled out over us, the pedophilia that's now been normalized and the mind control. And he didn't think so. He thought it had to do with the class action suit that is they're still trying to do that. They tried it in Canada. They tried it was it New York or I forget? No, New Zealand. They tried it in New Zealand, and now they're trying it in South Africa. And he has the feeling it had to do that the speeding up of his arrest. I mean, the arrest warrant was there already, but then the speeding up of it had maybe to do with that. I'm not sure. I think the pedophilia is a
okay. Hang on,
big thing.
Just to summarize, the question that you discussed with Fuellmich was why all of a sudden were you apprehended, brought to Germany, and arrested? You make the point, well, that might have been for that last interview that was touching on MK Ultra and child abuse. His point was, well, no, it might have been the reason for speeding up my arrest and putting me in jail might have been that I was getting traction with finally finding a jurisdiction where I could do my class action lawsuit, because he's been shopping all over the world to find a country where that international class action lawsuit could take place. And I know he couldn't find one. It was frustrating. He did it in the European Union. He did it in Germany and all kinds of countries. Apparently he was getting traction, and that was his assumption that was the reason that he had to be shut up, right?
Yeah. So
no, but hang on.
Can I
so
say
you're
about
Jamila, you're visiting this guy. He's been in isolation. He only gets 3 visits a month. He's doing court case after court case. You're looking him in the eyes. How's he doing? What can you say about that?
Well, he's very strong. I mean, he's very feisty, and he's busy with his case, and he's not being silenced. That's for sure. He makes statements from the prison, commenting on the world affairs, and just I think as a statement that you won't, they can't shut him up. He was wearing an orange T-shirt. He was very relaxed, big hugs for his sister and the friend, and very open to me because he didn't know me. I could be anybody, but we sat down. We first spent half an hour. We talked in English, and then I left after half an hour to give them time to discuss their own things. But yeah, he's very on the ball. He's very still tries to have the leads, and this needs to happen and that needs to happen, and so he's in control still. I mean, of course, you can see he's a little bit affected, but I mean, I don't know him, so I can't really compare it to. But he's just like you would see him in the Corona Ausschuss broadcasts, and it was. I can't. It was. Yeah, you have to ask me questions because I don't know what to say about it.
No, but I think you are answering it. I mean, this is a person you have never met. I've talked to him. I've seen him in Berlin, and I've interviewed him back in 2020. But you have seen him on the Corona Ausschuss, and you know the look in someone's eyes. And being in prison for so long a time in that regime might break a person also. And what you're saying is, well, no, he might be hurting, but he's not broken. And he's fighting away, and he's on top of things. So that's hopeful. In its that's the answer I was looking for, really.
Yeah. Now, one thing I thought. We discussed a lot more, but I don't want to say everything that we discussed because some things were personal and stuff. But one thing that he said was that I found interesting is that. He didn't say it so explicitly, but he implied that actually there are a lot more political prisoners in prison than we know. Because he told about one a man from Afghanistan, who apparently has an influential family in Afghanistan, and he knows a lot about the money flows in the immigration world. And but he's also suffering from trauma. I mean, he does have an issue with violence, except it's always in defense. So he has been arrested for self-defense, but according to Reiner, there's far more to his arrest than just this incident that happened. And he mentioned another guy who, I heard the story before, that there was a prisoner who wanted a cigarette. He wanted a cigarette from another prisoner, and the other prisoner didn't want to give it to him. And then this one guy just beat him so badly that the guy who didn't want to give the cigarettes had his skull stitched, and he was was a really bad attack. They put Reiner in isolation because of it, saying that it was for his safety. But Reiner now thinks that this attack was facilitated, that they knew this guy was violent and that they didn't go through the normal safety procedures or so to protect others, that they actually wanted this guy to be hit because he also knows information about something. And so we didn't talk about it long, but it was an interesting thing that a lot of these little violent happenings, that there are big stories sometimes behind it, and we don't know anything about it.
Yeah, on a greater scale, we can only wonder what's going on. But there's a stabbing in United Kingdom. Just the other day, a stabbing in Germany. Now, UK is in massive social media lockdown. I mean, even if you like something or retweet something, you'll get arrested and thrown in jail. Shut up or we'll apprehend you. Fuellmich is definitely not the only one. He was the first one in this wave, if you will. But we have Scott Ritter coming out. We have, I wrote it down, Richard Medhurst. We have Kim.com.
Richard Medhurst was the first one. He got arrested, or no, he got stopped at the
So there might be
airport.
A trend there, you know?
Sorry?
There might be a trend there over the last
Yeah, definitely. There's a wave going on.
Yeah.
And with Kim.com, he was a big sponsor of Julian Assange, and he also helped with get the plane, to fly him. I don't know if it's Kim.com plane or he at least made it happen. But that's an interesting one because it means that they are going after sponsors now. First it was going after the whistleblower and the journalist, but now it's the sponsors as well. And with Richard Medhurst, he's the first one to get stopped he's not the first one to get stopped at the airport, but he's the first one under the Terrorism Act, that his reporting on Palestine is an act of terrorism. So there is definitely a movement going on. And there was also this other guy who in America, I think, who was reporting about Rothschild, a rich, important guy. I can't because I confuse it now with the yacht that sank. That's another story.
Well, hang on, we'll just do that next time when we have our stuff in order. So to wrap up,
I mean, say there's a way of silencing people, and yeah.
Yeah. So that's scary in itself. And we see that, well, we're still happily chatting about it. So for the time being, at least we can do that. Anything final that you want to say?
Well, I would say even more so. I would make a call out to everybody. Like, you are now a journalist. You know, don't let them silence any of it. If millions of us broadcast, make their own news clip, if you do your one research that hasn't been done, do it. Every voice matters at this moment.
Yeah, exactly. And it's compliments for you also, being the Dutch independent journalist, driving all the way there and now doing this report from your hotel room all Europe. But if everybody turns into journalists, there's no way we can be silenced or stopped. So do your own part in getting this information out just by being a journalist. Exactly.
Like you as well.
Yeah. So, any final thoughts on the case yesterday, on the visit Wednesday, on your plans for next week, Jamila?
Well, there's so much that needs to happen. You know, I need to translate some documents. I need to post more. I need to write more. But there's so much going on. I mean, I was in this other court hearing in Holland about somebody who fights for a victim of child abuse. And I mean, really, it's hard work when the government doesn't work anymore. So we need all the help we can get, because we are the government. The government is failing. I mean, it's not our government.
Well, we'll close there. Thanks. Yeah. Looking forward to your next report, Jamila.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Het gaat hier vandaag over saamhorigheid.
Dagje zonder hemel.
Liegt niet. Normaal maken is wat niet is normaal.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make.
En dan ook geen hel meer.
You think I'm joking? Predator drones.
Dat is best makkelijk.
You will never see it coming.
Wat dacht je, alle mensen?
Laat staan dat ik kan ingaan over vuur.
Bezig met vandaag.